I never meant for him to see the screenshots. It was just a joke between girls, some flirty comments, some wedding doubts, a few pics from Miami I should have deleted. But he went through my phone. He saw the messages, every single one. Now his family thinks I'm a manipulative liar, and mine barely looks me in the eye. But honestly, if he hadn't been so insecure, none of this would have happened. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Now, let's get back to the story. I woke up on a Saturday morning in early August to find Tyler's side of our king-size bed empty and cold. That was highly unusual because he always slept in late on weekends and typically brought me coffee in bed around 9:30, along with whatever pastry he'd picked up from the French bakery down the street. It was one of our favorite weekend traditions. When I reached for my phone to check the time, I immediately noticed it wasn't plugged into the white charging cable where I'd left it on my nightstand the previous evening. My phone was sitting on Tyler's side of the bed, completely dead, which sent an immediate chill down my spine. My heart started racing as I realized Tyler must have gone through my phone extensively while I was sleeping. When I plugged it in and powered it back on, I was hit with dozens of missed calls and text messages from people in both our families, including his sister Emma, his mum Patricia, his dad Robert, and even my own Aunt Carol, who lived 3 states away. The group chat that had been my private safe space for months was now completely exposed to everyone we knew. It was supposed to be confidential, just me, my maid of honor Jessica, and my 2 other bridesmaids Sarah and Amy. We'd been using it for 8 months to vent about wedding stress, share funny memes about bridezilla behavior, and bond over the absolute chaos of planning a 200-person celebration. But apparently Tyler had taken screenshots of every single message going back to when we'd created the chat and had systematically sent them to both our immediate families, our wedding party, and even some of our mutual friends. I scrolled through the chat history with growing horror, seeing our conversations through his eyes instead of as the harmless girl talk I'd always considered them to be. There were jokes about hot bartenders from my bachelorette trip to Miami, photos of shirtless guys at the beach that we'd rated on attractiveness, complaints about Tyler's micromanaging of wedding details, and his mother's constant interference in our planning process. The message that probably hurt him most was one I'd sent after a particularly stressful day of cake tasting, where his mother had criticized every single flavor combination I'd chosen. I'd written, "Can't wait to get this wedding over with, I just want the honeymoon flings lol," followed by 3 laughing, crying emojis and a winky face. I tried calling Tyler immediately, but discovered he'd blocked my number completely. His mother Patricia had sent me a text that simply said, "You're lucky we didn't call the church yet," followed by a period that felt more ominous than any exclamation point could have. My stomach dropped to the floor as I realized the full scope of what had happened overnight while I'd been sleeping peacefully next to the man I thought I was going to marry in 2 months. Tyler hadn't just seen my private messages, he'd weaponized them, sharing them with everyone we knew and destroying my reputation and our relationship in one devastating digital blow. The whole situation had started innocently enough during my bachelorette weekend in Miami 2 months earlier in June. I'd been incredibly stressed about wedding planning because Tyler seemed to have strong opinions about every single detail, from the specific shade of blush pink for the napkins to the exact font we should use on the table number cards. His mother, Patricia, was even worse, constantly offering unsolicited advice and making passive-aggressive comments about my choices, while suggesting alternatives that happened to match exactly what she'd done at her own wedding 35 years earlier. Jessica, who'd been my best friend since college, had organized the Miami trip specifically as a way for me to relax and have some guilt-free fun before the wedding madness intensified even further during the final 2 months of planning. She'd booked us a gorgeous 4-bedroom Airbnb with a private pool just 2 blocks from South Beach and had planned a perfect weekend full of poolside lounging, shopping in Lincoln Road, and experiencing Miami's legendary nightlife scene. The group going included Jessica as my maid of honor, Sarah and Amy as bridesmaids, plus my cousin Kelly and my work friend Nina. It was supposed to be my last hurrah as a single woman, even though I'd been in a committed relationship for 3 years and hadn't been truly single since my early 20s. The first night we went to a trendy rooftop bar called Skyline that Jessica had found on Instagram, where the bartenders were all ridiculously attractive male models who were clearly moonlighting to pay for acting classes or gym memberships. We were definitely flirting with them and taking photos, but it felt like harmless fun between a group of girls celebrating their friend's upcoming marriage. I may have kissed one of the bartenders named Diego during a particularly wild moment when the girls were cheering me on, and someone had challenged me to live a little before you're legally bound to one man forever. It didn't mean anything serious or romantic. It was just a fun, spontaneous moment that happened because I was drunk on expensive cocktails and feeling free and rebellious for the first time in months of stressful wedding planning. The group chat during that weekend was absolutely wild and completely unfiltered. We were sending screenshots of the attractive bartenders with rating scores out of 10. We were photographing good-looking guys at the pool and the beach and creating elaborate fantasy scenarios about what our lives would be like if we lived in Miami permanently. We made jokes about finding backup husbands in case our current relationships didn't work out the way we planned. Sarah, who had been recently dumped by her boyfriend of 2 years, even created a poll in the group chat asking, "Who else thinks Madison settles too hard for someone so boring?" I responded with, "Don't remind me," followed by the crying laughing emoji and a skull emoji, because at the time it felt like we were just being dramatic and silly about the normal compromises that come with long-term relationships. Amy shared screenshots of boring text messages she'd been receiving from her own boyfriend back home, and we all commiserated about how men seemed to lose their romantic spark once they got comfortable in relationships. I shared a few of Tyler's messages where he was asking about mundane wedding planning logistics while I was trying to enjoy my bachelorette weekend. At the time, it felt like completely typical girl talk. We were being silly and dramatic and blowing off steam about the pressures of relationships, marriages, and societal expectations. I never imagined in my worst nightmares that anyone outside our tight-knit friend group would ever see these messages or take them seriously as reflections of our true feelings. But when Tyler discovered them 2 months later, he didn't see harmless jokes between friends. He saw evidence that I was fundamentally disrespectful, potentially disloyal, and possibly actively cheating on him with random men in Miami while using our friends as accomplices and enablers. When I finally got dressed and went back to our shared apartment that Saturday morning, I found that Tyler had moved out completely during the early morning hours while I'd been frantically calling him. All his clothes were gone from our walk-in closet, his toiletries had disappeared from our master bathroom, and he'd even taken small items like the coffee maker we'd received as an engagement gift from his aunt and the throw pillows his sister had bought us for our couch. The most devastating part was discovering that his entire extended family had unfollowed me on all social media platforms overnight. People who had been enthusiastically commenting hearts and congratulations on my engagement photos just weeks earlier had completely disappeared from my Instagram, Facebook, and even LinkedIn. It was like they'd coordinated a mass digital exile. My own parents called me later that Saturday afternoon, and I could hear the disappointment and confusion in their voices as they said they were deeply troubled by my behavior and couldn't understand how I'd been so disrespectful to Tyler when he'd done nothing but love and support me throughout our entire relationship. They'd seen some of the screenshots and were struggling to reconcile the daughter they'd raised with the person who had written those messages. My mother, who had been excitedly helping me plan every detail of the wedding for months, asked me point blank if I actually wanted to marry Tyler, or if I was just going through the motions because it seemed like the next logical step. The question hit me like a physical blow because I realized I didn't have a clear, immediate answer. My wedding planner, Carolyn, called me first thing Monday morning to inform me that Tyler had contacted her over the weekend to cancel all our vendors and terminate all existing contracts. The venue was keeping our $5,000 deposit because the cancellation was within 60 days of the event date, which was clearly stated in the contract we'd both signed. The photographer, florist, catering company, and band were all sending bills for cancellation fees that totaled over $8,000 in losses. The wedding dress I'd spent months choosing and had already paid for in full was hanging in my closet with the tag still on, a $1,200 reminder of the future that had evaporated overnight. I'd been so excited about that dress, a stunning A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves that made me feel like a princess when I'd tried it on at the boutique. My cousin Emma, who I'd always been particularly close with and who was supposed to do a reading during our ceremony, posted a vague but obviously targeted Instagram story that said, "Some people don't deserve a good man and don't realize what they have until it's gone." The comments section filled up with people agreeing and speculating about what had happened, even though she hadn't mentioned my name directly. Even worse, someone had shared screenshots of our private group chat in a family text message thread that I was no longer included in. My uncle David, who had always been like a second father to me, sent me a lengthy text calling my behavior emotionally abusive and saying Tyler was lucky to have discovered my true character before the wedding rather than after, when divorce would have been more complicated and expensive. I tried desperately to defend myself to anyone who would listen, explaining that the messages were taken completely out of context and that Tyler had fundamentally violated my privacy by going through my phone without permission in the first place. I said the jokes weren't serious expressions of my real feelings and that everyone was massively overreacting to what was clearly normal girl talk that happens between close friends. But nobody seemed interested in hearing my side of the story or considering alternative interpretations of what they'd seen. The evidence felt too damning to most people, and my explanations sounded like weak excuses and deflections rather than legitimate justifications for what I'd written. My friend group completely imploded in the aftermath of the revelation. Jessica and Amy both sent me long, apologetic text messages saying they felt terrible about the role their messages had played in destroying my relationship and that they should have been more mindful about the potential consequences of our group chat conversations. But they also gradually stopped inviting me to hang out and seemed uncomfortable and awkward whenever we ran into each other at mutual friends' events. Sarah, who had been the most vocal in encouraging my rebellious behavior during the Miami trip, actually unfollowed me on all social media platforms and posted a TikTok video with a story time about a bride she knew who had cheated on her fiancé during her bachelorette party and then acted like the victim when she got caught. She didn't mention my name specifically, but everyone in our social circle could easily figure out she was talking about me. The comments on my old engagement photos became increasingly vicious as word spread through our community about what had happened. People were writing things like, "Knew she was fake from the beginning," "Tyler definitely dodged a bullet," and "Some women just don't appreciate what they have until it's gone." Strangers who didn't even know me personally were sharing the photos and adding their own commentary about my character and worthiness as a partner. I eventually had to delete most of my social media accounts because the harassment and public shaming became completely overwhelming. Even people I'd never met were sending me direct messages to call me names and tell me I didn't deserve love or happiness. It felt like the entire internet had turned against me based on private conversations that had been shared without my consent. The hardest part of the whole situation was gradually realizing that Tyler was genuinely heartbroken and devastated by what he'd discovered, rather than just being controlling or insecure like I'd initially tried to convince myself. He'd seen messages that made him question everything he thought he knew about me, our relationship, and our future together. From his perspective, I'd been lying to his face about my feelings while secretly mocking him to my friends and entertaining the possibility of cheating on him with random men I'd met in Miami. The fact that I'd actually kissed someone else during the bachelorette trip, even briefly and meaninglessly, probably felt like confirmation of his worst fears about my loyalty and commitment. Tyler had always been incredibly trusting and supportive throughout our relationship. He'd never gone through my phone before, never questioned my friendships, never tried to control who I spent time with or where I went. The fact that he'd felt compelled to look through my messages that night suggested he'd been sensing something was wrong for a while and had finally reached a breaking point. I kept trying to reach out to him through mutual friends and family members, but everyone told me he didn't want any contact and that I should respect his decision to end our relationship completely. His best friend Marcus, who had been Tyler's best man and who I'd always gotten along with well, sent me a message saying Tyler was completely destroyed but was determined to move forward without me. 3 months after the initial explosion, I'm living in a cramped studio apartment across town because I couldn't afford the rent on our beautiful 2-bedroom place by myself. Tyler had been contributing significantly more to our monthly expenses because his job in finance paid much better than my marketing position at a non-profit organization. Every single day, I walked past the bridal salon where I'd spent hours choosing my wedding dress, having fittings, and imagining how beautiful I'd look walking down the aisle. The dress is still hanging in my tiny closet with all the tags attached because I never got the chance to wear it, and I can't bring myself to return it or sell it because that would make the end of our relationship feel too final. I obsessively check Tyler's social media accounts, even though seeing his posts makes me feel progressively worse about myself and my choices. He's been posting photos of himself hiking with friends, attending concerts and sporting events, traveling to places we'd talked about visiting together, and generally looking happy and healthy and free from the drama that had consumed our relationship. In several recent photos, he's with a pretty brunette woman I don't recognize, though he hasn't posted anything explicitly romantic or relationship-oriented. But she appears in enough pictures that it's obvious they're spending significant time together, and the thought of him moving on so quickly while I'm still wallowing in the consequences of my actions feels like salt in an open wound. I've written dozens of lengthy apology texts and emails that I've never actually sent because I know he won't read them, and they'll probably just make the situation worse by violating his clear desire for no contact. I keep trying to find the perfect combination of words to explain that I never meant to hurt him, and that the group chat messages didn't reflect my genuine feelings about our relationship or our future together. But the more time passes, the more I'm starting to realize that maybe the messages did reflect something authentic about how I was feeling, even if I wasn't fully conscious of those feelings at the time. Maybe I was having serious doubts about getting married and was using humor and rebellion as a way to avoid dealing with those uncomfortable emotions directly. Maybe Tyler was completely justified in being hurt and angry about what he discovered. Maybe privacy between friends doesn't excuse everything, and maybe some jokes cross lines that shouldn't be crossed even in supposedly confidential conversations. Looking back honestly at our relationship, I can see patterns that I'd been ignoring or minimizing. I'd often felt frustrated by Tyler's practical, methodical approach to life and decision-making. He was incredibly responsible and reliable, but sometimes I found myself craving more spontaneity and excitement than his personality naturally provided. I'd also been feeling increasingly anxious about the idea of being married to the same person for the rest of my life. Not because Tyler was a bad partner, but because I was starting to wonder if I was mature enough for that level of commitment, or if I still had too much exploring and growing to do as an individual. The Miami trip had felt like a temporary escape from those anxieties, but instead of addressing my concerns directly with Tyler, I'd used the bachelorette weekend as an opportunity to act out and pretend to be someone I thought I wanted to be. Someone more carefree and rebellious and open to possibilities. I blame cancel culture and toxic friend groups and wedding stress for what happened, but deep down I know those are convenient excuses that don't address the fundamental truth of the situation. Tyler didn't destroy my life by exposing my messages to our families. I destroyed my own life by sending those messages in the first place, and by failing to be honest with him about my doubts and concerns when they first started developing. Every flirty comment about attractive strangers, every joke about backup husbands, every dismissive remark about our relationship was a choice I made. One screenshot at a time, I'd been building a case against myself without even realizing it, creating evidence that my commitment to Tyler was conditional and superficial. The financial consequences of the broken engagement have been devastating as well. Between the lost deposits, cancellation fees, and having to cover rent and living expenses on my single income, I've had to drain my savings account and take on credit card debt just to survive. The wedding fund that Tyler and I had been building together for over a year is gone, spent on vendors who provided no services because there's no longer an event to provide them for. I've had to take on freelance work in the evenings and weekends just to make ends meet, which means I have very little social life or time for activities that might help me move forward emotionally. Most of my friends are either married or in serious relationships, and I feel like I no longer fit into their couples-oriented social circles. My family relationships have also suffered significantly. My parents, who had been incredibly excited about the wedding and had grown to love Tyler like a son, are struggling to understand how their daughter could have behaved so poorly. They've stopped asking about my dating life or relationship prospects, and family gatherings feel awkward and tense in ways they never did before. My younger sister, Ashley, who was supposed to be a bridesmaid and who had looked up to my relationship with Tyler as a model for her own romantic goals, has been distant and judgmental. She's made several comments about how I threw away something perfect and how she would never treat someone who loved her that badly. The professional consequences have been unexpected but significant as well. Several of the wedding vendors we'd worked with are connected to my industry, and word has spread through professional networks about what happened. I've noticed that some potential clients and collaborators seem less interested in working with me, possibly because they question my character and reliability based on how I handled my personal relationships. I don't blame him for leaving anymore. I blame myself for giving him every reason to go, and for being too cowardly to address my concerns about our relationship in a mature, direct way that might have allowed us to work through them together. The engagement ring catches the light from my phone screen as I scroll through photos of other people's happy relationships. And I wonder if I'll ever be brave enough to love someone honestly and completely again, without the safety net of secret. Conversations and backup plans and exit strategies. Maybe someday I'll meet someone who will help me become the kind of person who deserves a love like what Tyler offered me. But first, I have to figure out how to become someone I can respect and trust, someone who says what she means and means what she says, someone who doesn't destroy beautiful things just because she's afraid of how much they matter.